I'd like to welcome you to Marble King's 75th anniversary celebration. I'm Gerald Witcher. I'm an avid Marble King collector, and for the past 20 years or so, I've been on a mission to learn as much as I possibly could about Marble King. And someone told me when I first started that I would have more questions when I finished the research than I did when I started. And that's actually true, but thankfully it's not the same questions I started with. But what I'd like to do is take you back in time to even before I was born, and I'm pretty old, to November 30th, 1949. TVs were really not a thing in most households at that point. There was no internet, no video games. Kids did what they did in years past for pastime, and they played marbles. And so the demand for marbles was just as strong as it ever was. Yet, it was a terrible time for someone to start a new marble manufacturing company. And you might wonder, well, why is that the case if the demand is just as strong as it's ever been? Well, by 1949, M.F. Christensen was out of business. Christensen Agate Company had closed their doors as well. Master Glass Company closed. Davis Marble Company closed. Jackson Marble Company out of business. Kokomo had made marbles briefly, but they had stopped doing so by 1949. Ravenswood Marble Company was out of business. Alley Agate Company would close their doors in late 1949. And Acro and Cairo Novelty Company would soon follow within a matter of months. Well, what was the problem that caused all these marble companies? Why were all these companies going out of business? Well, it was because of Japanese cat's eye marbles. The Japanese introduced their marbles sometime in 1947, 1948, through wholesalers or distributors from Canada into the U.S., and it was creating havoc in the U.S. marbles industry. The Japanese marbles were selling for about half the price of U.S.-made marbles. They had a small marketing advantage as well in that they put a shooter in every bag of marbles. And of course, the American makers, they didn't know how to make cat's eyes at that time. So the rage was cat's eye marbles. And that's what the kids wanted. You know, they wanted to be able to hold that marble up and see that it looked like a cat's eye. And so the traditional makers, when they went to the wholesalers to get orders, the big jobbers, the 5 and 10 cent stores, which were like the major chains today, like Walmart and so forth, they were being told your marbles are not as desirable and as marketable as they one time were. Yet Marble King flourished in this new environment. They took off like a rocket. And it just didn't make sense. Within a couple of, just really a matter of a few months, they were one of the top 3 in production behind, or along with, really, Peltier and Vitro Agate Company. So that was one of the things as I started to do research, is how did that's not natural, how could that happen? And one day, Beri Fox, who's president and CEO of Marble King currently, shared with me a scrapbook that Adele Rubin had put together in the mid-1940s. It's a huge scrapbook, and it's very heavy, a lot of pages in it, but it's just jammed full of old newspaper articles, photographs from events. There were marketing materials in there, but one of the key things that I found in the scrapbook was articles from magazines like Family Circle, Cornette, Pageant, Playthings, Life magazine. All of these publications were out of business long before the internet. So the articles and information that was there was basically lost forever. However, I was able to start piecing things together it was sort of like someone had taken a jigsaw puzzle, poured it out on the tabletop, and I was able to connect this piece with this piece. And sometimes I had to go to a courthouse or to a library or research some other aspect to put the whole thing together. But it created a vision and a real story about what the conditions were prior to and immediately prior to Marble King's formation that allowed them to not only survive but thrive in this new market. These three gentlemen all were very instrumental in Marble King's initial success. Without them and the interaction between the three, Marble King would never existed. The gentleman on the left is Beri Pink. Beri Pink is now and forever will be the Marble King. Beri Pink was a brilliant man. I like to think of him as sort of the Elon Musk of the early 1900s. He was an inventor. He held multiple patents. He was an author. He wrote a book called The Romance of Glass Marbles, or The Romance of Marbles. But Beri Pink built a huge conglomerate business in his lifetime. It was started out as Beri Pink Enterprises, and in the 1930s the name was changed to Beri Pink Industries until it was later phased out many years later. But Beri Pink Industries had a sales force of 25 people, and Beri had income coming from his inventions. He owned Marble King Inc. stock. He owned Peltier Glass Company stock. He was the owner of Beri Pink Container Corporation, which made glass bottles. It was a plant in Arkansas. And he also was president and owner of U.S. Reflector Corporation. And when automobiles first came into play, they had headlights, but they didn't have taillights. And Beri Pink's company, U.S. Reflector Corporation, made a tin disc that had marbles stamped all in that disc, and they were put on the back of cars so that the headlights that cars did have at the time, when they were approaching a vehicle from the back, the marbles would reflect the light back so someone could see there was a car ahead of them. 32 states made this reflector mandatory, and that created a tremendous volume of business, and of course Beri Pink provided the marbles for that. But in addition to the business aspect of Beri Pink's background, I wanted to know what Beri Pink was really like. But fortunately, Beri Fox, his namesake, Beri Fox is one of the few remaining people alive that knew Beri Pink. So I asked her, what was he really like? Tell me about his personality, and so you can really get a feel for what kind of person he was. And she said he had the warmest smile. He was a very sharp dresser, as you can see here in the photo. She said when he walked into a room, he was the kind of person that people would just sort of gravitate to. Very easy to talk to, and of course he was a high achiever and very, very successful. But she said Beri Pink loved the game of marbles. He loved children. She said that when he visited the household, the Howdyshell household, the first thing he would do when he came through the door is take his hat off, put it on the table by the door, and get in the floor in his expensive business suit to play with the kids. And so the love of the game of marbles and the fact that he enjoyed being around kids made him very successful in the marble industry. Now the second gentleman is Lawrence Alley of Alley Agate Company fame. And the interaction here is that going back to when Beri Pink first went to college, he attended a couple of years at the University of Pennsylvania, and World War I broke out. World War I was 1914 to 1918. And so Beri Pink enlisted in the U.S. Naval Reserves. And during the war, he stayed in the Naval Reserves until 1933 on a part-time basis. But in 1922, he became involved with the U.S. Intelligence Department of the U.S. Naval Reserves, and that took him around the world 3 separate times, which was a really big deal in 1920 because obviously we didn't have airplanes and the kind of transportation available that we have today. Beri Pink retired as a lieutenant commander from the reserves, and he had a pretty long career with them, but after World War I was over, it was pretty much a part-time endeavor. Now, going back to his education, he was able to continue his education while in service, and he actually graduated from Princeton University in 1919. And he immediately took a job with the Rosenthal Company. Beri Pink lived in Passaic, New Jersey, which is just across the river from New York City. And Rosenthal Company was a New York City company. They made rubber balls, rubber bands, all kinds of novelty items. But the important part of the job that he took with Rosenthal Company is they sold their items to the big 5 and 10 chains, the Woolworths. I think there were 5 or 6 major retailers at that time, and they were located in the New York City area. But Beri Pink took the job as an independent agent, and obviously there was no salary or anything. He was just out of college, and so he really wasn't sure that was going to be a long-term career for him, and he decided that he would take a brief vacation. He chose the Greenbrier Resort, which is in White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia. And while there, he was in the lobby and he overheard a group of ladies talking about the game of marbles. Beri Pink was an ace marble player when he was a child, and he always carried marbles in his pocket. And he sort of made his way into that conversation. And during the conversation, one of the ladies said, well, my husband has a glass marble manufacturing plant that he's interested in selling. And so the lady was the wife of Lawrence Alley, Alley Sr. And so she introduced him to Mr. Alley. It was an immediate friendship. Beri Pink said, well, I don't know anything about making marbles, but Mr. Alley said, it's very easy. You just gather up some scrap glass from surrounding businesses and melt the glass and roll the marbles around. And so 2 weeks later, Beri Pink was the owner of a small glass manufacturing facility in Sistersville, West Virginia. So he went to one of the buyers that he knew in New York City through his Rosenthal connection and said, if I could come up with marbles priced to sell 20 for a nickel, which was an outrageously low price. Glass marbles were very, very expensive at the time, and most of the marbles that kids played with in 1920 were still clay marbles. So in any event, he said, price to sell 20 for a nickel, would you give me a large order? And the buyer said, if you're not crazy, I'm very interested. He said, how many can you make? And Beri thought about it, and he said, well, I think I can produce about 1,000 marbles a day. And the buyer sort of chuckled. He said, well, that would be enough to supply one of our stores. We have over 200. That buyer was Woolworths, 5 and 10 cent. And so he told Beri, when you can get a much larger production and supply all of my stores, come back to see me. Well, immediately Beri knew that his small operation in Sistersville was not large enough. So he shut that down and turned his attention to this gentleman, Sellers Peltier of Peltier Glass Company. And going back to understand the relationship here, in the late 1800s, Victor Peltier had a glass company that made stained glass, very high quality glass. Tiffany, for example, used their glass products. Victor died in 1911, and the business was continued by Sellers, his son. And unfortunately, in 1919, they had a huge fire and destroyed the factory. And so Sellers was trying to figure out how he could refinance rebuilding his factory and what he was going to do in the future, he had heard about this guy, Beri Pink, who was making marbles in Sistersville, and so he decided to make a trip to New York City. It was designed to be a 3-day trip. Well, that trip turned into a 3-week trip. And when Sellers returned to Ottawa, he had the financing for rebuilding and retooling his business. He had marble machines that he was able to order and would be delivered very soon thereafter. And Beri Pink became an investor in Peltier Glass Company. So Peltier started to experiment with marbles and really looked at it as a big business venture. And by 1927, they were mass producing marbles and producing about 500,000 marbles a day. At that point, Beri Pink went back to his person at Woolworths that he had had the previous discussion with and said, I now can supply your 200 stores. He got his first big order from Woolworths at that point. And not long after that, the other, I think 5 other major chains were buying his marbles as well, and Peltier's business obviously soared. So were it not for these gentlemen and how everything started out, the business opportunity would not have been there for Peltier. Now, Beri Pink built his business not with the beautiful collector marbles that most people think of now from Marble King Inc., but he built his business with what he called claries. They're clear, transparent glass in various colors and clear. And the other part of the business, which actually was just as big, was a version of what we know as Chinese checkers. I mentioned previously that Beri had traveled abroad and circled the globe at least 3 times. And on one of his trips to Germany, he discovered a game called Sternhelma. And he thought about bringing this game back to the United States, which he did. And he made this particular game with the name Cinco Checo Marbolo, which is a horrible marketing name. It's not politically correct to begin with. It's hard to say, and it certainly would be hard to remember correctly. But Peltier was making the marbles for this game, but he was very successful with it. By 1939, he had already sold 2 million of these games. But he had competition in the United States. Bill and Jack Pressman of the Pressman Toy Company had acquired the U.S. rights to a game called Hop Ching Checkers. And Hop Ching Checkers was even more successful than Beri Pink's version. And by 1939, they had sold over 13 million of these games. And Alley Agate Company, Lawrence Alley, was providing the marbles for that particular game. And because it was growing so fast, Alley Agate Company could not keep up with the production requirements. And at that time, they were producing about 2.5 million marbles a day. So Lawrence Alley introduced Beri Pink to Jack Pressman of the Pressman Toy Company. And at that point, they were in competition. And as a compromise, Beri agreed to stop selling his game if, in exchange, Pressman Toy Corporation would start buying the Chinese checker marbles for their game that were in excess of the production that Alley Agate Company could produce. And because of that relationship, Pressman Toy Corporation became a major client of Marble King Inc. later in years after Mr. Alley had passed away. And they continued as a major contributor to the bottom line for Marble King for many, many years. How did Marble King, the name, come about, and how did Beri Pink earn the title many times over of the Marble King? Well, he did so with marble tournaments. He started promoting marble tournaments in 1935. He used his 25-person sales force to promote these tournaments, and he instructed them to take 2 months out of every year to promote these tournaments. They would be local and city tournaments, then statewide champions, regional champions, and they would compete for the national title. The pinnacle of promotion in marble tournaments was in 1940 at the World's Fairgrounds in New York City. Beri Pink, when he first started with promoting marble tournaments, was spending about $10,000 a year of his own money to provide trophies and marbles and all types of paraphernalia for the marble tournaments. He actually copyrighted the name Marble King in 1937, and obviously that name has stuck through all these years, and I think it will continue to into the future. But in 1940, as I said, about I think Beri estimated somewhere between 250,000 to 500,000 kids competed all across the country that year for 66 slots in the national tournament. And all the kids had to do was get a local sponsor that would pay for their transportation to New York City, and Beri Pink picked up all the expenses for all the kids. And it was a 3-day tournament. They had the tournament in the morning, in the afternoon and evening hours. They did all types of fun things for kids. They did a Hudson River cruise. They went to a baseball game, Ripley, believe it or not, which was probably a big thing then. They had very elaborate dinners. They went to plays. So these 66 kids that came from all over the country, many of them from very, very small cities and communities, would never have had this kind of exposure, and it was a huge thing and a milestone in their lives to be able to compete in this tournament. So we come to November 30th, 1949, when Marble King Inc. was formed. The initial filing, and it was a partial filing to the state of West Virginia, accounted for 51 of the 100 shares. Beri Pink had 49 shares. Adele Rubin, who was his secretary, had 1 share. And Lucius Coleman, who was Beri's CPA, had 1 share. And you kind of do the math there and see that Adele and Lucius would probably vote the way Beri did in any controversial issue with the company. But technically Beri owned 49% of the company. On the other side, the Peltier family owned the remaining 49%, and the reason that the initial filing with the state was not complete was that they were trying to do some estate planning. Sellers Peltier was in his 70s at the time Marble King Inc. was formed, and so they didn't want all the stock in Sellers' name. So the way they wound up is Sellers Peltier had 14 shares, Jeannie Peltier, his wife, had 14 shares, and Duncan Peltier, who was one of his sons, sort of the heir apparent to Peltier Glass Company, had 21 shares. He went by the name of Donnie, is how everyone referred to him. Well, business took off really strong, obviously, because of the demand for the Chinese checkers marbles and the sales force that Beri Pink Industries had created, and the sales efforts there with the relationships they had. And the first thing that they did is hire Roger Howdyshell. Best decision those two gentlemen ever made. Roger had studied engineering at the University of Cincinnati for 2 years. Proved very, very beneficial to him later at Marble King because he had a very analytical mind. He knew how machinery worked. He loved working with his hands. But unfortunately, World War II broke out, and Roger enlisted in the Army Air Corps, which later became the U.S. Air Force. But he was stationed in the European theater for a period of 2 years. He enlisted initially in the Army Air Corps Reserves and as a second lieutenant. Well, during his 2-year stay in the military, he rose to the rank of major, which is not an easy task. Obviously, Roger had a lot on the ball, or he would not have secured those kinds of promotions. And in fact, I was talking to a gentleman who knew Roger pretty well, and he said that Roger ran the factory like a military organization, which you can understand with his background why that indeed might be the case. But when the war was over and Roger returned home, he enrolled in Marietta College in Marietta, Ohio, and received a business degree. At the age of 26, he was the very first Marble King employee. And he was hired to be the office manager. And what had happened is in 1949, Lawrence Alley was very ill. And even though his factory was producing about 2.5 million marbles a day, he knew that the end, would soon be coming. So he decided to retire, and he called his old friends Beri Fink and Sellers Peltier and asked if they'd like to buy the factory, which they did, obviously, because they needed additional production capabilities and facilities. Well, the way the new Marble King Inc. company was supposed to work was that Lawrence Alley was going to manage the whole operation and Roger Howdyshell was going to be the office manager. Well, unfortunately, when the final deal closed, Lawrence Alley headed for Florida and Roger Howdyshell was left there with no experience in making marbles, really a trial by fire. And fortunately, Sellers Peltier sent some of the Peltier employees to Marble King to help them retool the equipment. Obviously, Lawrence Alley only made West Virginia swirl marbles, and Peltier marbles were more ribbon style. So a lot of things had to be changed. Some of the equipment went from Peltier to Marble King, and some of the old Alley equipment went to Peltier. Of paramount importance is the Peltier people that came to help Marble King get started, helped them with their glass formulas. And you can see in the early marbles that were made at St. Mary's, a lot of the same colors that Peltier was using at the time. Now, Roger dedicated his life to Marble King. He served with the company 42 years in a variety of capacities. He was initially the office manager, moved into the presidency, and eventually in 1983 became owner of the company, which I'll discuss in a few moments. But he's accredited with many things. Just a few that I can mention in the time frame we have is he produced the first American-made cat's eye marble in August of 1956. He also is credited with producing the first patch and ribbon marbles. There were actually two variations of it. The first variation that they didn't make a lot of was called a 6-panel marble, which had the same color patch on the top and the bottom with alternating ribbons. And then the more famous pattern, the regular patch and ribbon, had a patch of one color on one pole and a different color patch on the bottom pole with alternating ribbon colors. He also created a unique veneering style. Some people have said that he invented veneering, but he really didn't. But the type of veneering that he created was very unique. And what he did is take solid color base glass, typically it was milk white glass, and he was able to strike colors on the outside 1/64 of an inch thick. And why that was important is that traditionally marbles that were made, the colors were swirled throughout the center of the marble. And by just putting colors on the outside of the marble, he was able to reduce his production cost by about 30%. He also was very instrumental in relocating the factory in 1958 when tragedy struck Marble King. And he was also very instrumental in the National Marble Tournaments. He started sponsoring National Marble Tournaments in 1968. He was on the board for over 20 years, and when he passed away in 1991, Beri Fox assumed his seat on the board and continues through today, and they still sponsor the National Marble Tournaments. Well, the first factory that Beri Fink and Sellers Peltier acquired was the Alley factory in St. Mary. You can see three different views, a top view, a side view, and a front view. This first photo here in the center was taken in the 1930s either shortly thereafter or before Mr. Alley purchased it, and it was actually used as an apple storage and processing facility. But Mr. Alley bought the factory and renovated it into a huge marble producing facility. And you can see from this top view that he actually added quite a bit onto it for storage and other functions. And you can see a little bit of that over here. But the most important thing was this section in the back where the two smokestacks are. That's where all the magic happened. That's where the first American-made cat's eyes were made. Some of the beautiful collectible marbles like watermelons with ox blood, or just a variety of different highly prized and valuable marbles today were made in that general area. And it was sort of a private area. Not all the employees were allowed back there because in that day and time, all the secrets of how things were made was very well guarded, and only certain employees were allowed in that specific part of the building. Unfortunately, that's also the area where the fire started sometime later. During the St. Mary's years, Marble King Inc. was very prolific. They had really unique marketing ideas and concepts that allowed them to really outpace the competition. One of those was a brilliant promotion for Esso service stations. And the way that works is they had a barrel. It looks like a big barrel here, but it's really only about this tall. And the way the promotion worked is when a parent brought their child in and got a fill up in gas, that child could reach into the barrel, and all the marbles they could take in one hand, they were able to keep at no cost. And it was very, very successful promotion for them. They actually intended to roll it out to the major grocery store chains, but unfortunately the fire in 1958 happened, and they never got around to doing that after the fire. They were just more concerned with getting back in business and getting their production renewed. They also developed a bottle hanger package, which would hang over either a carton of 6 or 8 glass Coke bottles. And when you bought that carton of drinks, you got the marbles free. And they had a tremendous business built up in private label packages, where the retailer or the business, whoever they were, could put their logo on the packaging and use marbles as a premium or a giveaway. And then also a big portion of their business developed for marbles that were designed to be put in things like cereal or soap powder or other grocery type products. And to sort of expand your vision on just how many marbles Marble King was producing at the St. Mary's facility, they had all these things going on, plus some other marketing initiatives. But at the time, Beri Pink was really not involved in making the marbles. That was Roger Howdyshell's job. He was the guy to get it done. Whatever the business came in, it was his job to fulfill it. And Beri Pink and his 25 salespeople were out there creating ongoing demand. Well, on top of all the other things they had going, one order came in 1957. It was from General Foods for their Post Toasty cereal. And the order was for 100 million marbles. Now think about that. At the time, they were sent to the General Foods facility, and they were going to do the inserting. But 100 million marbles. Well, today they pack marbles in 25-pound boxes about like this. At that time, the purchase order required that they be 60-pound boxes with roughly 5,000 marbles in each box. So just think about what kind of volume that was on top of everything else they were doing. And 100 million marbles in 60-pound boxes would equate to 20,000 cases or boxes, or 600 tons of glass. Can you imagine how many train car loads of marbles that would have been? And you might notice also the pictures of the factory, both the St. Mary's factory and where they relocated to in Payton City, were both on railroad spurs so that they could do all their shipping, as was done in the day, via the railroads. But this was the kind of business that they were doing, and they were struggling just to keep up. Beri Pink could produce more sales and more orders than any other company could fulfill. They also had a lot of success with tournament bags. And these tournament bags were initially in both cloth, which were manufactured in Japan, and there were two variations in 1957 of plastic. You had a smaller one and a larger one that had similar volume to the cloth bags as an alternative. It was interesting, for some reason, they put 3 more marbles in every plastic bag alternative versus the cloth bag. But the cloth bag was eventually phased out not too many years later because it was so expensive to produce. And here you can also see a very rare museum quality type piece, which is one of the original cardboard containers that they put these tournament bags in at retailers. And this thing is at least 70 years old, and the cardboard has survived all these years, which is phenomenal. Well, unfortunately, disaster struck, as does in many glass-type businesses. And on January 6, 1958, in the early hours, a fire completely consumed the factory, and it was a total loss. Now, I'd like to help you or envision just how things were working for Roger Howdyshell at the time. He had all this pressure from meeting the volume demands that were being created. During 1957, Beri Pink and Roger Howdyshell were negotiating with Vitro Agate Company to purchase their company. Their sales were like others were dropping, and they thought they might actually sell the company. But unfortunately, in the summer of 1957, Beri Pink had a stroke, and that was shortly followed by a heart attack. So he had serious health problems. Well, Roger Howdyshell, in addition to the pressure of running the business, had to step it up and pick up some of the additional functions for Beri Pink. He also, on a personal note, his family was growing. Jean, his wife, was pregnant with Beri's sister, whose name is, she goes by Sally. Beri was 2.5 years old at the time. And on the evening of January 5th, the scenario was that Sally had been born. In those days, the mother and the daughter or the child stayed in the hospital for a full week. And they were in the hospital in Parkersburg. Well, with all this other stuff going on business-wise, Roger went to bed on the evening of January 5th, expecting to get up and go pick up his wife and his new baby daughter and bring them back home. Unfortunately, about 4:30 in the morning, he received a phone call that the factory was on fire. So Roger must, with all this pressure, have felt like the weight of the world was on his shoulders. But there's an old saying that says, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. And that indeed was Roger's mode of operation. That's how he rolled, in other words, what people say sometimes. But he was very able to compartmentalize the functions and focus on the most important things in his life and get things turned around. In fact, they were back producing marbles at their new facility in Payne City within 60 days. Crisis struck the company once again when Beri Pink passed away June 23rd, 1962. As I said, Beri had already had stroke and heart attack. This wasn't expected. It was just a sudden thing when he was out to dinner and he simply dropped dead. Well, this created a tremendous crisis for Marble King because Beri Pink owned 49% of the company, and so they had to figure out a way to liquidate his holdings in the company and move forward. Well, that's where a gentleman named Al Sandberg, which you see pictured here, stepped up. Now, Al was the #2 person in charge at Beri Pink Industries, and he managed the sales force along with Beri, and he was also the executor of Beri Pink's estate. So he was the logical person to try to sort all this out and come up with a solution. And so Al stepped into the presidency temporarily. It took him about a year to settle completely Beri Pink's estate. Roger at the time had already been made president of Marble King because Beri Pink had said in one of his board meeting minutes that he was no longer physically able to maintain the presidency of Marble King, and he nominated and they elected Roger Howdyshell as president. So Roger graciously stepped aside for a period of time where Al came in and indeed worked out a solution. Well, what they did is go to a holding company in Marietta, Ohio. Roger was already familiar with the holding company. It was Colonial Enterprises Inc. The compromise that they reached was that Colonial would purchase all the Marble King shares, and they would purchase all the shares of Beri King Industries, which would be phased out several years later. But from that point forward, Marble King Inc. continued on with Roger Howdyshell as the president. He was also a board member of Colonial Enterprises along with Donnie Peltier. But Al stayed with the company after the estate was settled as the manager with Beri Pink Enterprises' old relationships. In other words, he still managed the key relationships for Marble King Inc. For several years going into the future. Well, Roger continued from 1961-62 on into the future, very, very successful in building the business. But in 1983, Roger purchased Marble King. It wasn't a strategic acquisition that was planned. It was a defensive posture. And what had happened was, in the early 1980s, late 1970s, the Howdyshells, both Gene and Roger, were very good friends with Don and Helen Michaels, who owned Champion Marble Company. And in fact, both companies made marbles for each other. The two couples visited each other's factories regularly, and they became very, very good friends. In fact, Beri Fox told me that at one point, Champion Marble Company was making all of Marble King's Chinese checker marbles for them. So it was a very strong relationship. Well, unfortunately, in the early 1980s, Don and Helen Michaels had marital problems, and they got a divorce. And as a result, Helen Michaels assumed ownership of Champion Marble Company. Dave McCullough had already joined them as the plant manager for Champion at the time. Well, Helen Michaels, Roger and Gene knew nothing about this, but Helen Michaels went around their back to Harry Robinson, who was the CEO of Colonial Enterprises, and made a firm offer to purchase Marble King. The problem was that Roger had in his employment contract a 30-day first right of refusal. So Harry went to Roger and said, Roger, the company's going to be sold. We have a firm cash offer. Here's the price. It's not negotiable. You have 30 days to come up with the money, or Champion is going to buy the company. Well, Roger and Gene had done very well financially, but they didn't have near the kind of money that it took to buy the company, so they mortgaged their assets, and with the help of a local bank and the state of West Virginia, bonds were issued to make up the difference so that Roger could purchase Marble King at that point. And from 1983 to 1991, when Roger passed away, he worked tirelessly to pay those bonds off, and they were finally paid off at Roger's death. Again, tragedy struck the company. In 1991, April 18th, Roger passed away of congestive heart failure. Roger had several health issues. He had 5 heart attacks and 2 open heart surgeries. So during the later years, there was a lot of times he couldn't even be at the factory. And if there was a silver lining in any of this, it certainly was a major tragedy for the family and the company. But what happened was, because he couldn't be at the factory, Beri Fox was the day-to-day go-between for the factory and Roger. And in doing so, he was able to, Beri was able to learn how the real Marble King business was done, how the machinery worked, how to fix problems, glass formula issues, all those kinds of things. She was able to learn how to fix and repair those kind of things. So at that point, even though there was a tragedy, the Howdyshells decided to continue on with the company. Jean Howdyshell, who at the time was 62 years old, had no experience in making marbles. She was familiar with the key accounts because she had traveled with Roger to New York City in the past. But it was left to Beri, who was 35 at the time, to step into the role as COO, Chief Operating Officer. And they really weren't sure how things were going to go at that point. Again, Al Sandberg was very helpful in this process because he went around to all the key clients with Jean and with Beri and assured them that Marble King would continue on and that they would be able to take care of the account the way they had previously done. Well, one of the first things that Beri did was she learned that the next year the World Marble Cup was going to be held in England, and that year they were going to dedicate the tournament to her dad, Roger Howdyshell. So Beri put together a team of former U.S. marble champions, and they entered the 1992 World Cup and won it. And it was particularly sweet for Beri because the inscription on the trophy said the Roger Howdyshell Memorial Trophy. And they also, you can see here that Beri and Rick Mulhenny, the team captain, appeared on TV for the first time in Marble King's history. CBS This Morning in 1992 to promote the tournament, and obviously it was a big deal and a big success. The company continued on and actually flourished from 18 employees in 1991 to 79 employees in year 2000, and they were so successful that Jean Howdyshell was voted by Entrepreneur Magazine as the Entrepreneur of the Year in West Virginia. And you can see here a photo of the 1998 employee roster. And the real key for that success and up to year 2000 was the Pokemon phenomenon. They had entered into a joint venture with Peltier to produce the gems, which are nothing more than just a flattened marble, and the game itself. So they did the packaging, and they worked 2 full tanks, 5 days and sometimes 6 days a week just to keep up with the production requirements for this relationship. Unfortunately, in 2000, the Pokemon name was sold and that relationship terminated, and it forced Beri to make some very tough decisions to cut back their staff. Once again, tragedy struck the company when Jean passed away in August 20 of 2003. She had been CEO of the company for 12 years and had led the company through some phenomenal growth years. At that point, Beri Fox stepped in as the role of president and CEO and has been there since 2003. Now, a couple of things that you may not know about Marble King, I'll just touch on some of those. One is that Hollywood loved Marble King. Steven Spielberg invited the Howdyshells to the preview or airing of a movie called Goonies, which Marble King marbles were featured. You probably remember Home Alone. I think there was Home Alone 1, 2, and 3. The scene where marbles were put on the marble floor in the foyer, and the bad guys came in and slipped on the marbles. Those were Marble King marbles. The movie Hook, Marble King's marbles had a cameo appearance there. Dennis the Menace, those were yellow Marble King cat's eyes in that movie. And then there was a full-length feature film called King of the Hill. He also made several TV appearances. The first full-length movie, obviously, was listed under Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood in 1999. They actually came to Hayden City to produce that film, which Mr. McFeely on the show showed kids how to make marbles, and so they were able to go into the factory and actually shoot footage of how that occurred for that program. In 2007, they were featured on Made in America, and then shortly after, in 2008, Some Assembly Required. And at the time, as 2010 approached, Beri was doing a lot of speaking engagements on the loss of jobs in U.S. manufacturing. And at one of her presentations, someone from the Colbert Report was in the audience and took note of some of the things she was saying, and as a result, she was asked to be on the Colbert Report, which aired November 10, 2010. And while she was there at the taping, backstage, she met someone else, Martha Stewart, and Martha invited her shortly thereafter to be on her show. And Beri actually, in anticipation of that show, made a special Martha Stewart marble, which is highly collectible today. It's not a huge volume of them. The collectors have renamed that marble the Lips Marble because it looks like a giant set of lips with lipstick on it. Also, Marble King, as the business model changed over the years, game marbles, eventually the volume dropped. Beri got involved through the military exchanges in exporting marbles. Today, they've exported marbles to over 17 countries, and it accounts today for about 30% of their overall business. Marble Kings also had the first marbles to go into outer space. This NASA Flight 1518N took Marble King marbles into outer space, and they did calibration tests to measure the expansion and contraction levels of glass marbles in outer space. NASA also made this official marble tournament gauge to precisely position marbles for future tournaments. Marble King was invited to be the West Virginia representative recently in 2019 at the White House for the Made in America showcase, and it's quite a privilege for Beri to represent the company there, and obviously a lot of good promotion for the company through that. Marble King received a very large volume of different awards from states and various organizations and those kind of things, which I know the employees are very, very proud of. One that I know is specifically important to Beri is in 2018, West Virginia Living named Beri to the class of 2018 Wonder Women. And I think that name is quite appropriate. Beri has taken the company through some very strong challenges as the demand for game marbles has waned. It only represents a very small percentage of their overall business today. But she's been there through the tough years. And if you think about it, Roger was CEO of the company for 42 years. Jean had been with the company as CEO for 12 years. Beri got her first paycheck at the age of 18 from Marble King. And as of today, she has been involved in helping Marble King grow and keeping it a vibrant financial alternative for over 50 years. And I know Beri Pink certainly earned many times over the title of Marble King, but I personally believe in the future, when we're all dead and gone, that Beri Fox will be remembered as the Marble Queen. Here you can see a shot in Christmas of 1957 of Beri and her dad, Roger. They had no idea, obviously, of what lay ahead for them as it related to Marble King, and it's been a very interesting future for all concerned. Thank you for your time.